Let's talk about the vertical and horizontal line test. So for a function to actually be a function, each input has to have one and only one output. For a function, each input has one and only one output. In other words, if I plug in 2 into a function, it should spit out one and only one number. Let's just say it's 7. Or if I plug in -5, it should spit out one and only one number. Oh, let's just say it outputs 15. If you ever have something that has more than one output for an input, that is not by definition a function. So for example, the point 2 comma 7 would live on this graph. If you also had a point on that graph 2 comma 9, that would be bad because you're saying the input 2 should go to two separate places, 7 and 9. It can't go to two places. It can only go to one and only one places. Only one and only one place. So a visual test for how you can tell whether a function is actually a function is something called the vertical line test. So here's what the vertical line test says, and then we'll try some examples of how you would use it. So a vertical line test says if there exists a vertical line that intersects a graph more than once, then it is not a function. Reason being is if you send a vertical line through, say x is equal to 2, you'd run into the graph twice there, 7 and 9. That's not a function. So if you can do that everywhere and you only hit the graph at most once, then you're good. So for example, let's figure some of these out. Let's say, oh, how about this is going to be my graph. Function or not? Well, you can see that if you have any sort of vertical line, let's just say I put a vertical line here, hits it at most once, here at most once, there at most once. There's no place that I can draw a vertical line that's going to hit this in more than one place. So this is a function, and the reason for it is because it passes the vertical line test. Every input has one and only one output, because if you think about it, say this was, say, the number 5, well, then it would be down here. Its output would be down there and only there, not in more than one place. Versus, let's just say we had something like, how about this instead? Well, if you think about some vertical lines, there are definitely some places where if you put a vertical line, it hits it at most once. But if I draw a vertical line here, there exists a vertical line that hits the graph more than once, namely it hits it 1, 2, 3 places. That means for this input, there is more than one output. That is not a function. So that's how you can tell visually looking at a graph whether or not you actually have a function, whether or not it passes the vertical line test. So, okay, let's say you now have a function and you want to figure out whether or not that function is something called one-to-one or not. Well, one-to-one means that for each output, there was one and only one input that got mapped to it. So each output comes from one and only one input. So for example, let's say my graph, let's just go with a line to start with. If you think about an output is a y value. So if I think about, let's say I'm at the y value right here, it looks like the only value that got mapped to this output right here is this x value from right here. So every output has one and only one input versus something that looks a little like, let's go with the parabola or quadratic. And if you think about, say, this output right here, this height, this y value, it looks like here and here are both at that output value, which means there are two values that came to the same output. And so if you think about, let's say this was f of x was just equal to x squared. Well, if you think about the output value, let's just say 9. There are two values that get mapped to 9. Either x is plus or minus 3. So you can see that there are two values that give me the same output. That's not one-to-one because there's an output that came from more than one input. And so maybe you're thinking about this already, but previously we were talking about the vertical line test. Test for one-to-one is whether or not it passes the horizontal line test. So let's talk about the horizontal line test and do a couple more examples to show you how it works. So the horizontal line test states the following. If there exists a horizontal line that intersects the graph more than once, then it is not one-to-one. Okay, so for example, let's say instead we had something, that looks like the following. Anywhere I put a horizontal line on this, it's going to hit that graph at most once. So this is going to pass the horizontal line test, which means it is one-to-one. Any horizontal line hits it at most once. Versus even something like the following. Again, there are definitely places where you could put a horizontal line that hits it at most once, but there exists at least one line such that that horizontal line hits it in more than one location. That means that output came from multiple inputs. That's not allowed if you're one-to-one, so this is not one-to-one. It's because it fails the horizontal line test.